Shalom, Israel. We are back and we are looking at how to count the Omer. We are in Leviticus chapter 23, and today we're looking at verse 15. And I'm going to go ahead and read it here. And from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, or the Omer of the wave offering, you shall count for yourselves 7 completed Sabbaths. And so we're supposed to count 7 Sabbaths. And we're going to look at another scripture that relates to this, but it's a little bit different. And we're going to see if today we can kind of connect these two ideas together. Deuteronomy 16 verses 9 and 10, it is written, "Count 7 weeks for yourself. Begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the grain, and you shall perform the festival weeks to Yahuwah your Elohim, according to the voluntary offering from your hand, which you give as Yahuwah your Elohim blesses you." Now, this is a little bit different than the previous verse that says count 7 Sabbaths. This one says count 7 weeks. So we're going to continue to try to see if we can sync these two ideas together as we look at Leviticus 15. I wanted to make a quick note that most of the scripture does refer to this feast as the Feast of Weeks. It's not called the Feast of Sabbaths, but the Feast of Weeks. And that's an important distinction as we look forward. Although most of the scripture and history supports the idea of weeks over Sabbaths, nevertheless, the scriptures do mention Sabbaths at the beginning of Leviticus 23 and also in verses 15 and 16. Now, we shouldn't really pit these things against one another, weeks versus Sabbaths, but they are both critical pieces to understanding how to count the Omer correctly. We will have 7 weeks or 7 sevens. We will also have 7 Sabbaths, and we will also have 50 days, which we'll talk about later at another time. But I want to draw your attention to this expression, the festival of weeks or feast of weeks, which is Hag Shavuot in the Hebrew, which I'll circle up here. And you'll see the Shin Bet and Tav within this word Shavuot is actually Shabbat. Then we see the Ayin, which in the ancient is literally looks like an eye. So in this expression, we can see within the weeks that it almost is relating to us. Do we see the Shabbat contained within the Feast of Weeks? And this is really critical because one of the most important historical events ever to take place happens on one of these Sabbaths within these 7 sevens or 7 weeks. And specifically, what I'm referring to is the resurrection of Yahushua Messiah, which occurred on Mia Sabbaton, the first of the 7 Sabbaths leading up to Shavuot. Now let's look at Leviticus 23:15 again. "And from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count for yourselves 7 completed Sabbaths." Now, there is a dilemma, and regardless of the reckoning of how you count this, there's a little bit of a problem. We're going to look at it right now. Now, let's say if you're counting the first Sabbath up in the verse right here as the 15th of the first month, then the 16th as where you start your Omer count. If you were to count the Sabbaths without distinguishing them, you'll see the issue. Here would be the first Sabbath, and actually the 7th day of unleavened bread would be a Sabbath too. Then we'll just kind of keep counting the Sabbaths down. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we have 8 Sabbaths before we reach the 50th day. Now the problem is the scripture says there's supposed to be 7 Sabbaths. Now this is a problem. Now even if you use the Sadducee, Karaite, Samaritan calendar, in most years as well, if you would do this and count that 7th day of unleavened bread, you're going to end up with 8 Sabbaths. So this is a little bit of dilemma, but we're going to look at this and see if we can understand how to correctly count this in the next slide. We're going to take our time and look at Leviticus 23:15 one more time and see if we can lock down these 7 Sabbaths and 7 weeks counting up to Shavuot. Let's look at the scripture. And you shall count from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths. They shall be perfect. Unlike the last version where it said 7 completed Sabbath, this one reads a little bit different. They shall be perfect. So we want to look at this phrase and see how it connects and distinguishes classes of Sabbaths. And this quote is by Daniel Craig below here. And Daniel Craig does a great job with explaining this. So we're just going to read the whole quote. The next part of counting is to count 7 Sabbaths. They shall be perfect. The word perfect or complete is tamiot. This is a further indication of counting the 7th day, since 7 is the number of perfection, wholeness, and completion. It says they shall be perfect, tamiot. This language is to specify to count only the 7 days. The 7th day of unleavened bread is also a Sabbath, as is the first day of unleavened bread. But these Sabbaths are not counted. They are not perfect 7th days according to creation, which fall in a perfect, unbroken cycle of the 7th days. Now, really what's being said here is there is a difference between the weekly Sabbath cycle that has been going on since creation, these perfect Sabbaths, and the annual Sabbaths. So even in the verse above, after the day after the Sabbath, this Sabbath right here is a completely different class of Sabbath versus the 7 Sabbaths mentioned below. And this distinction actually in the verse actually is another proof that the author is trying to distinguish the type of Sabbath, so there isn't confusion like we saw in the last slide, where if we just start counting all the Sabbaths right in a row, then we're going to end up with 8 instead of 7. So let's go ahead, and now that we understand that these 7 Sabbaths are referring to perfect Sabbaths that deal with the weekly Sabbath, we can now use this information to count correctly. So again, the 15th is the Sabbath in question, and the morrow after is the 16th. So our count starts from there to count the Sabbaths, and we can just count down to 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Those are our 7 Sabbaths, and this actually chart here is even for this year, 2018. Now, according to Deuteronomy 16, 9, and 10, we're also supposed to count 7 weeks, and that's pretty simple. We just start from that same starting point, the 16th, and we just count out 7 sevens. And the 7th day of the Omer count is actually the first 7 there, and we just count down these weeks. Whoa, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the 7th, obviously, you just count by 7s, is 49. Now, we'll talk about later on getting to the 50th day in verse 16, because that's another topic, but hopefully you can see the distinction between the annual Sabbaths and the weekly Sabbaths. And these are really, again, 2 distinct cycles that we don't want to mix up, because if we do, we're not going to be able to arrive at the right appointed time. So it's important to remember that we will count 7 weeks, and we will also have 7 Sabbaths leading up to Shavuot. Remember, the word Shavuot contains the word Sabbath within it, and it reminds us with that ayin to keep our eye on those Sabbaths, to make sure we watch them, because remember, Yahushua Messiah rose on Mia Sabbaton, the first of the 7 Sabbaths leading up to Shavuot. I hope you have a great day, and shalom.